But now we're going to move on to our next story, which is certainly got a lot of coverage this week, and that's following Thursday when the Scottish Liberal Democrat MSP Liam McArthur tabled a bill in the Scottish Parliament to legalise assisted dying for terminally ill adults. Now, specifically in that bill, there are carve-outs, so it's only for people who are terminally ill where there has been independent medical sign-off from two separate independent professionals. It wouldn't be for anyone living with a disability, it would just be for those with terminal illness. And I'm curious because there is polling that's been released by Dignity in Dying Scotland saying that 78% of their respondents supported introducing such legislation. But I'm curious to know your thoughts, so do get in contact with us. But now we're going to talk to Dr. Gordon MacDonald, who's the Chief Executive of Care Not Killing. Dr. MacDonald, thank you for joining us on air today. What do you make of the fact that this legislation's been tabled?
Well, this legislation is dangerous at the end of the day for many people, and it will put vulnerable people at risk of pressure or coercion to end their lives prematurely, perhaps because they feel that they're a burden on their family or on their care services or on the NHS. That's what we see happening in other places where this sort of legislation has been passed. And there's no reason to believe it won't happen in Scotland as well, should the bill go through. I would just point out that although Liam McArthur has been saying that he's bringing forward a very tight bill and that it's only applying to terminally ill people, what he has done is he's defined terminal illness as being people who may have years or decades to live, and it will include lots of disabled people because they fall under the definition. So he says it doesn't include disabled people, but it will, in fact. So I think he's not being completely honest about the scope of what his bill will do. And also, of course, there's a very high chance that campaigners who want to see the law extended will bring court cases to see that happen.
So there's a concern for you that if this bill was introduced, that the scope could be widened in later days?
Yeah, some of the ways in which it's been written, it's not clear. Things are stated in explanatory notes which are not on the face of the bill, so they would immediately be subject to judicial review potentially. He strays into powers that are reserved to Westminster, such as drug licensing. So again, that's another area where there's likely to be legal problems. There are quite a few ambiguities left in the drafting of the bill, and I suspect that's intentional because he's been struggling to draft the bill. It's taken them 2.5 years. And they've been struggling to get a bill which meets all the promises that he's made. And yet, when the bill has actually come out, there's lots of questions still unanswered.
Can we talk about this in a sort of tangible sense from the point of view of an individual, say? So let's say I was diagnosed with a terminal illness tomorrow. The ending was going to be quite grisly. And so I consciously, wanted to make an informed choice that I wanted to end my life. At the moment, of course, that option isn't available in the UK, and if I were to travel abroad and had the assistance of a family member to take me on the flight or whatever, that family member could actually be prosecuted for assisting suicide. Isn't there an element here that legalising this in the UK would kind of create a safer, less litigious environment for people who ultimately are just trying to do the best by their loved ones?
Well, very few people have actually been charged with assisting suicide in the UK. I think it's about 3 or 4 people out of about 150 or 160 cases that have been looked into. So it doesn't happen normally. It only happens in the most serious cases where you have some sort of coercion or somebody having a nefarious motive. But there's a lot of scaremongering put forward by those who are campaigning for a change in the law and saying, well, folk might have 14 years in jail just for travelling to Switzerland with someone. That doesn't happen, quite frankly. And so we have to look at the facts rather than just all the propaganda and scaremongering which is coming out of those who want to see a change in the law.
I suppose the facts, though, are that the law as it stands, that could be a possibility. And I know, of course, could is a different thing, but the way the law is written means that someone could be prosecuted for helping their loved one travel.
Well, it would only happen if they were doing it for, some bad purpose, because they wanted to access an inheritance and they were pressurising people. And so they essentially were coercing somebody into committing suicide. It would only be in that sort of situation that there would, in fact, be a prosecution.
But But back on that point around personal choice, I mean, if I did make the decision, I'm fully hypothetical, that I did want to end my life so I didn't have to go through, grueling treatment that would leave me, unable to care for myself later in life, shouldn't I have that choice without there being legal implications?
Well, the question is, what do our choices, what implications do they have for other people? I can choose to drive down the road at 90 miles per hour, and if I crash my car and kill somebody, then it has negative consequences for other people, and so I shouldn't be allowed to do that, and the law doesn't let me do that. The same is true in relation to this area. Other vulnerable people get put at risk. Over 50% of people in Oregon say that they're having an assisted suicide because they feel that they're a burden. People shouldn't be being put under that pressure that if they feel a burden on their friends or their family or their care services, that they should be persuaded in some way to opt for assisted suicide. That's not right, and we shouldn't be creating a law which will allow that to happen.
Very interesting, Dr. Henderson. I mean, let's talk about timelines for that law. I mean, of course, it's going to probably go to committee stage now. I mean, do you anticipate it getting passed by the Scottish Parliament?
I think it's not clear, to be honest. I think that there's an awful lot of MSPs who haven't made up their minds. They might be in favour in principle, but they're worried about safeguards and they're worried about people who are vulnerable. And they know daily what it is to deal with constituents who are in vulnerable situations and who are finding that the system, whether it be the healthcare services or local authority services, don't deliver the needs that they have. They don't deliver the care that they need. So that's the bread and butter of being a politician, and it doesn't take too much for them to apply that experience to this bill and say, well, this is going to add a huge level of danger, which is perhaps better avoided.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Henderson, for joining us there, speaking about sorry, I don't know why I've been calling you Dr. Henderson. I'm so sorry, Dr. McDonald. I will read my notes and do my homework properly next time, I promise. Thank you, Dr. McDonald.
I can change my name for the next time if you want.
Perfect. That'd solve it. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Dr. McDonald, there, the Chief Executive of Care Not Killing. Gosh, I need to look more closely at my notes today, it seems.